Good morning and welcome. I'm Mary Ellen Wiederwohl, the President and CEO of Accelerator for America. Accelerator is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that finds and develops real-time solutions to economic insecurity and shares them with cities across our country. Our constituency is mayors and local leaders, so I'm especially thrilled to be joined today by two of America's great mayors, Mayor Michael Hancock from Denver and Mayor Quinton Lucas from Kansas City. Good morning, mayors.
Good morning.
I'm going to do a really quick intro for each of you. Your biographies obviously are quite long, very successful men. We have 30 minutes, so here's the short form. Mayor Hancock is in his third term as Denver's 45th mayor and is extremely well regarded by his peers and leaders around the country for his substantial body of work, including major initiatives around housing, homelessness, transit, and development. We're thrilled to have you join us today and bring your experience and voice to our conversation.
Thank you.
And Mayor Lucas, who is affectionately known as Mayor Q in his hometown of Kansas City, is in his first term as Kansas City's 55th mayor and the youngest mayor in a generation in that town. He is known as a rising star for many good reasons, but especially around his work for criminal justice and housing supports in his community. Welcome.
Good to be with you.
I'll also add that Mayor Q is one of the co-chairs of our advisory council for Accelerator for America. So both of these mayors are in the thick of it every day in national organizations. Mayor Hancock, this is a public finance forum, so I'm going to start with you with some budget questions. You have, since you took office in 2011, really lived through it all. You came in after the Great Recession. You governed through a lot of the greatest expansion in economic history in America, then a pandemic, and now an incredible amount of federal funds that are coming into cities. Talk with us this morning about what that experience has been like over these almost 12 years and how you're moving forward with your budget in these interesting times of federal largesse.
Absolutely. Mary Ellen, first of all, it's good to be with you. It's good to see you again. And let me thank the Milken Institute for the invitation to be here. A venerable, well-regarded institution that many of us like to be a part of and like to be in front of. But you're absolutely right. We have, over the last 11 years, rode the wave, and it's been quite the volatile wave of economic challenges and tremendous growth, quite frankly. I came in and I remember I took office on July 18, 2011, and the first thing we had to do was find $100 million to cut out of the city budget to get ready to be passed by city council by November. So we had 50 days to make that happen. And then all of a sudden, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but by 2013, we were riding the wave of economic prosperity that was unprecedented in Denver's history. We became one of the top destinations to live, one of the top destinations to work, top destinations for companies, and our growth and prosperity was tremendous. And we hadn't seen anything like that in Denver. And we saw a lot of people move into Denver, 30% growth over 10 years. And then we, of course, as you know, in 2019 hit the skids with regards to the pandemic. In 2020, when we shut the economy down, we were one of the first cities to do so. We knew that we were going to hurt a lot of people, a lot of folks, particularly our low wage earners, our women, people of color, would be hurt along the margins because their jobs will go away. And we were greatly concerned about it, but nothing trumped our need to keep people safe, healthy, and alive. And so we focused on that. But one thing that gave me confidence was that we worked very hard to build a resilient economy, something we didn't have when I became mayor. We had a very thin bench. So if the economy slowed down or for whatever reason we had another great recession, Denver was in trouble because small businesses hadn't grown. We didn't deepen our bench. And that's one of the things we focused on was our entrepreneurialism, our innovation, and building small businesses to create the supply chain and the downstream for our larger businesses. And so with that shift in focus, we were able to withstand the volatility of this economy. Thankfully, and we still, obviously lost companies, lost restaurants, and lost part of our growth. But the reality is that Denver was forecasted and is doing exactly what has been forecasted, and that is be one of the first cities to roar out of this economic slowdown due to the pandemic. We still are in recovery. It won't be a question of if we recover. The question will be how we recover. And we do want to build back better. And that means that we want to reach those who are hardest hit during the economy, and we want to make sure that we go in and protect and help give them a lift. Small businesses, women, low-wage earners, people of color who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic.
Well, Mayor Q, you took office in 2019, and you probably felt like you had about 5 minutes in office to do what you planned to do, and then comes along a pandemic. And you were in a similar circumstance of having to think about budget cuts, and then along comes this new federal money. So living this paradigm of from scarcity to abundance, how are things with your budget today, and where are you headed?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the changes that we saw. A lot of us who were in that 2019 generation of mayors in 2020 had all of these plans. And I have the fortune of having a team that won a Super Bowl early in 2020. So I thought for a few weeks, foolishly, this is the easiest and greatest job ever. And it turns out that we would run into much more serious challenges. But as Mayor Hancock notes, I think there are a few things that smart cities have done. And a lot of the mayors that you'll interact with through the Milken Institute, certainly Mayor Hancock and others, are those types of sharp mayors, did a few things. First of all, we all had to find ways to be responsible with our budgets. Cutting money where we needed to, making sure we were still funding infrastructure projects that were already started. And so really, as we look at both rescue plan dollars, infrastructure dollars, and hopefully build back better, much of it is fortunately kind of plugging in to some of the plans that we had already started making in Kansas City. I think the important thing for anybody who is thinking about this with government, or if you work with governments, is knowing that in each of our jurisdictions, we continue to have plans, we continue to have an outline of what we wanted to do in the future. And I think the important moment that we're in right now is, how do you make sure that we are ready? We're ready when the federal money comes in, we're ready as we're interacting with our states, and importantly, we are ready to let the public know as well that we need workforce opportunities. We need to make sure that we're working on representation. We need to make sure we're supporting small businesses as we look to actually roll out our dollars. And so that's, I think, just one area of focus. Another thing that I think has been important for us in Kansas City is having a breadth of projects and opportunities. Previously on the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I had the fortune of serving on the Infrastructure Committee, which Mayor Hancock chairs. And much of our discussion there were things ranging from broadband deployment to public transportation, to roads and bridges, to rail, making sure that for us, infrastructure isn't just a conversation of one big old project or one big bridge, even though a lot of mayors have them, and I have one too, but it's making sure that as there are federal programs that we can highlight in Kansas City, for example, infrastructure relating to helping to cure, I think, historic discrimination when we built roads through Black communities in our city, one which my family lived in, right? Making sure we have something to deploy there. In Kansas City, making sure we have funding support for zero fare transit, an initiative that I've been happy to see expand. I've seen the new mayor of Boston, Mayor Wu, has invested in that. That's the sort of thing that we're trying to do in KC, make sure that we have a number of different areas of focus. So it is a lot to take on while you're still battling a pandemic, while you're still looking at all of those issues we talked about in 2020, police relations, racial relations, and more, but making sure we keep our eyes on that long-term prize in terms of how we build our communities long-term, particularly communities that are experiencing growth. Denver, I know, has had amazing growth, but even in Kansas City, we're quite proud to be a Midwestern city that's seen growth in recent years. And so we're going to try to keep it that way.
You ask a mayor what his or her number one task is, it's always about growth. That's a good thing. And we've had a lot of it over the last decade. Cities have been home to America's growth. So at Accelerator, we have published a few documents over the last couple of years to help mayors manage this new amount of federal money coming in. First with the ARPA, the ARPA coming in, helping cities establish stimulus command centers to really manage that influx of money directly to cities. And then in December, we published our first version of an investment guide for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the IIJA. It's a mouthful. And so we got that out quickly to mayors to help really wrap your minds and arms around what is this that's coming to my city. So Mayor Lucas, you mentioned one of the projects that's close to your heart, the divide, and the way the infrastructure has divided us. And at Accelerator, we've long couched our work in two policy areas, transit and infrastructure and economic development. And wow, are these things two of one thing more than ever? Talk to us a little bit more about a project you hope to get done in Kansas City. And then Mayor Hancock, I'd love to hear from you about a sort of systems change generational project you've got in mind as well.
Well, first of all, Mary Ellen, I thank you for giving a shout out to that guide. I promise this is not a prop. I have that December guide sitting right next to me on my desk. This was not for this event. I just refer to it a lot because this is a super important time. Whenever money's coming in, you have to make sure you're ready to spend it well. And for us in Kansas City, the goal wasn't just to say, oh my goodness, we have all this money, let's distribute it to wherever we can to make sure we get it spent. But instead, how do we actually really listen to the spirit of what the infrastructure bill had, what the president's been talking about, and what politicians, Republicans and Democrats are saying, which is that we want to make long-term systemic change in our communities. The project that I described before in real focus in Kansas City is a highway by the name of 71 Highway. And back in the 50s, like in many other American cities, folks were looking for a faster way into a downtown community and had to pick which neighborhoods they would cut up. For us in Kansas City, it was an historically Black neighborhood, actually working class Black communities and families that were moved out and displaced. For too many years, we've done nothing with it since. When I was a kid growing up, that highway was being constructed. I still remember asking my mom, why's all that dirt in the middle of our community? And they say it's faster for other people to get through it, so they don't have to stop and experience time with us. And so we recognize that with this project, we have a chance not only to improve the infrastructure along it, addressing lights, traffic accidents, and so many other things, which is a key part of it, but also work on things like wayfinding and making sure that we're actually stimulating the frontage roads nearby to ensure that when people are in our neighborhoods, it isn't just a factor of how quickly you can get through the hood in Kansas City. It's a real story of there are new opportunities, there are new ways to engage with areas. And by the way, that takes a lot of money. And the amazing thing is, and the thing that I think is so important for mayors to focus on right now is, this is our one opportunity, not just to address the squeaky wheel, right? Usually, and unfortunately in too many of our cities, particularly older cities, right? We're dealing with roads that are decaying, bridges that are under some risk, all types of items where we just have to plug those holes now. This gives us an opportunity to say, all right, well, while this is very important, this is also something where we can be creative, we can be thoughtful, we can talk to experts and consultants. I've gotten to talk to people at Accelerator for America and any number of organizations. And so that's the sort of thing that we're working on in Kansas City. We are very proud of. And I think the best part is, there are a whole bunch of people in every one of our cities that says, all right, I'm hearing about all this money, but I ain't never gonna see it. I'm glad that we can finally say, no, not only will you see it, and not only is it not just about people getting through your neighborhood, you'll see the results in the years ahead on your streets, all around you, and hopefully with the population growth we can have when we're truly investing in the core of our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mary Ellen, I got to tell you, I love being on panels with mayors like Mayor Q because he absolutely gets it. He understands systems. As your handbook lays out, systems, you got to think not only about the project itself, but the impacts of those projects. And I think for far too long as mayors, and I'm not just indicting current mayors, but I'm talking about past mayors, with all the great and good intentions of improving neighborhoods, we didn't think about what those improvements may mean to a neighborhood and what systemic impacts might mean here in Colorado. That I'm thinking about is as we take these federal infrastructure dollars, and by the way, the state of Colorado last session passed a bill that reformed how we will fund transportation infrastructure projects, will go be even more money to cities like Denver. We get a chance to impact lives and create ladders of opportunity for folks, as Mayor Q, I think, pointed out, and I don't want us to lose that point. When we go into a neighborhood and we invest in infrastructure of any sort, we need to think about how that impacts the people who live in those neighborhoods, and particularly vulnerable communities, because we make them more desirable for people to live in. And we also get a chance to lift them up. If I can marry good, affordable, accessible, convenient transportation mobility options with affordable housing, now I'm transforming lives and we're changing the shape and scope of people and their opportunities in their neighborhood. And so that's what we're going to be looking for with these dollars coming from the federal and state, as well as the unprecedented investment that the people of Denver have voted to make in our infrastructure going forward. So that catalytic project for me will be the longest highway in the nation, which is in here in Denver in the Metro Denver complex called Colfax. And that segment that sits in Denver, right now we find challenged properties, commercial properties, we find decaying buildings, we find very bad road in disrepair. This is not like any other highway that you may find going through the city. You know, I-70 in Denver, for example. This is more of a surface highway that you can cross. It looks like a neighborhood street, but it's 3 lanes on each side, lined with commercial properties along each side of the street. And it's a major thoroughfare for our metropolitan complex. Well, we have a BRT design for the project. And these federal dollars will allow us to complete that design, as well as jumpstart the investments of commercial properties and the redevelopment of this area, creating new jobs, lifting up the residents who live near these properties, and creating mobility options around them along with their affordable housing. So with jobs, mobility, and housing, I think we get a chance to create the trifecta necessary to really transform lives and, quite frankly, transform a major swath of our city, leading to the metropolitan region. We have seen this happen in Denver, by the way, in a road called Brighton Boulevard, which is what I like to call the elbow arm to downtown, between downtown and airport, where we came in as my administration. We made a $41 million investment to redo what I call the ugliest road in Denver. And once we did that, we saw that road, that redevelopment of that road attract billions of dollars of commercial and residential development, transforming the area. And so we know that when the public sector leans in with the right strategies, the private sector will follow almost 5-10-fold to redevelop and to create opportunities. We just must guard against involuntary displacement and gentrification. And the city is best armed to do that. And again, we can build back better, but we got to think about how we build back better. And that means protecting the most vulnerable in our community and making sure they have an opportunity to participate in the opportunities that are going forward.
So familiar. You know, I hail from Louisville, and Louisville has its own history with infrastructure that divides. And so, Mayor Lucas, your highway is our 9th Street, and nearly every city across the country has a story of this infrastructure that was put in place to divide us, to segregate us. And now we have a historic opportunity going forward to really change that. But we have to take, some people call it a whole of government approach, call it a holistic approach, to think about what will these impacts be, because even as we go forward well-intentioned with these new investments, we have to have all of the secondary and tertiary strategies to wrap around them to be sure that we don't inadvertently displace people or have a negative impact on folks who have already suffered mightily, whether it's 400 years of suffer, the last 85 years, or the last 2 years. A lot of folks have had a lot to deal with. So it's time to make these equitable investments. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to do that, because Mayor Hancock, you mentioned your state. And we have a phenomenon across the country of blue cities and red states. I live in one too. And this infrastructure money is gonna, in part, flow through states. States are kind of the holders of a lot of that. I'd like for each of you to talk a little bit about how you're gonna work with your states and how you're gonna work with other entities, quasi-governmental and even private sector, to get some of this work done in your communities. Mayor Q, you wanna throw in on that?
You know, absolutely. I think the first thing, and I will note that I am in a state right now where we have a Republican governor, 2 Republican senators, Republican state legislature, Republican pretty much everything statewide. And then you've got my city in St. Louis kind of as those blue dots on the end. So first step is actually cooperation is key. And I think for any mayor who is working on these issues now, building that relationship with your governor is going to be a big part of it. And I'll note sometimes blue cities and blue states have issues with their governors and mayors and all that too. So I think our first step was making sure we have that open form of communication. But all of us, and look, we interact in politics and government, but whether it's business for you, part of it is just having very strong projects that tell a clear story about how this is good for the state of Missouri, the state of Colorado, the state of Kentucky, has been part of our success. It is saying, no, we're not just saying we want ours, because everybody would say that, and then you are forced to just be in a divide of who gets what, and y'all don't vote for me that much. Instead saying, look, this project makes a lot of sense. It's making sure that sometimes your state leaders have a chance to come see you. For those of us who aren't blessed to have the state capitol in our cities, right? Making sure that you're creating opportunities for them to experience your infrastructure, the progress you've made, and actually just how efficient you can be sometimes on past projects and state funding. And so, you know, I think it is one, and don't get me wrong, I had to, when we first heard it's running through the states, I said, can't they rewrite the bill? Isn't there some way to make that happen really quickly? But then after that, you say, all right, how do we be mature about this? How do we build relationships with our suburban communities? How do we make sure that brand Kansas City and all of us who touch the city and the area are part of those same projects and ideas? And so that's been key for me. The other part is, it's making sure that you show up and you listen. And so I go to the state capitol, go to the governor's mansion, making sure you talk about things like infrastructure, which by and large aren't really controversial. And so for me, you remove that controversy and instead you just say, this is why this is the best infrastructure project in the state and perhaps in the country. And that's how we've really tried to do that as you're picking your priority projects. To go back to an earlier question, right? This is exactly why you need to make sure as mayors and leaders that you have a good plan for what you're going to do. Because if all you're saying you're going to do is, oh yeah, we're just going to spend $50 million on a whole bunch of stuff, then nobody cares, right? But instead, if you actually say, this will be game changing for our state, there will be real economic development opportunity for Republicans and Democrats and everybody who comes through, that's the way that I think we've been able to make that happen. And I hope that continues to be our successful path with the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, Mayor Hancock, you have an incredible regional set. You have an incredible amount of regionalism in Denver. Cities around the country study you for this. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the state and how you work as a region.
Yeah, I was just about to say, Mary Ellen, I think Mayor Lucas hit it right out of the park on that one. It is about regionalism. We compete as regions and not as cities anymore. And that means not only globally, but also within the state. Again, Colorado passed a bill last year, which created new avenues of funding, but also new strategies of how we would redistribute it, which means that every city is going to reap a new benefit from that. And if we want to be effective, the best way to sell infrastructure strategy, we were able to pass that bipartisan bill in a blue state, by the way, working closely with Republicans, because we did the conversation, we brought the conversation as a regional conversation. It doesn't make sense for me just to improve Colfax Avenue that I talked about if I'm not working with the cities that also bracket Denver along Colfax Avenue. I mean, we got to do this together, and this makes more sense to do it together. But taking that regional conversation to the state and demonstrating not only our commitment to work collaboratively and in coordination, but also demonstrating empathy and understanding of what rural parts of Colorado are facing with regards to infrastructure investment, and being able to articulate their interests and their concerns made a world of difference as well. And it cultivated bringing in those legislators that support and engage on those issues. And so we will need to continue to do that, because if rural Colorado is strong, then we're all strong. And if Denver's strong, rural Colorado is going to be strong as well. But we cannot leave them out of the infrastructure conversation. Let me just put a pin in this to demonstrate what I'm talking about. When we talk about, for example, broadband coverage throughout the state of Colorado, it hurt my heart just as much watching kids in rural Colorado during COVID shutdown drive 10, 12 miles to try to find a signal so they can do their homework, as much as it did to find kids who were right here in the inner city, sitting in their homes, unable to connect with their teachers because they were given laptops, but didn't have Wi-Fi in their homes. To me, it's a tragedy all around. And so when we argue about the need to invest in that communication infrastructure, we demonstrate the same empathy and the anecdotes from rural Colorado, just as we do from Montbello High School here in Denver, Colorado.
Well said. We have a lot more in common than we have apart. And I heard a term the other day about the exhausted majority of Americans who are tired of the partisan rancor, who are tired of the division, and just want us to come together around the things that we share rather than the things that divide us. And so staying on that, talked about it today, Mayor Hancock, what are you most excited about in 2022? Still the new year. We're still giving each other Happy New Year greetings. What's next that you're most excited about?
Well, besides the Kansas City Chiefs winning the Super Bowl, and no.
Well said, well said.
Well, first of all, giving COVID the heat-ho. Our public health department is very optimistic about 2022 being hopefully the last leg of this pandemic. And I think all of us are ready to get back to our normal way of life and to begin to just begin to repair and to address the issues that we know are manifested themselves during this time. Mental health, for example, addressing other issues like opiate and meth addictions that are in our city. Crime, we're addressing it, but we know that we've got an uphill battle as long as we're continuing to be dragged by this pandemic. None of us want to see the challenges that we're facing continue in our city. So I'm excited about getting rid of COVID, turning back our focus to the things that matter every day to the people of our city, and really just celebrating the city that has demonstrated tremendous resiliency during this time.
Well, Mayor Q, I know you're aiming for that Super Bowl championship, so we'll just check that off. But what else is on your 2022 wish list you're excited about?
First of all, I know we have only a little bit of time left, and Mary Ellen and Mayor Hancock, you have both mentioned how we need to think as regions. And for those of you who have not experienced Denver or the greater Denver region, Mayor Hancock and his peers have done an exceptional job. In this competition of regions, sometimes I say, man, Hancock's getting more of my Kansas City kids who go out there to settle and build careers and lives all the time. But part of the way they do that is that they focus on the hard stuff too. It isn't just about bringing in tourists. It isn't just bringing in people that are making a lot of money. It's figuring out transportation for the people that need to get through different parts of the community. It's figuring out, as was noted, mental health, addiction, all of those tough issues, homelessness, that I think real mayors are trying to address while we're also talking about growth and expansion. And so for us in Kansas City, I think the excitement is that we are at a time where businesses are actually still kind of excited about how they can open up again. Government, and we have spent these last 2 years of the pandemic really trying to build up our healthcare apparatus, mental health in Kansas City, addressing homelessness in new ways. That's a housing first approach to make sure that we have people first housed and then getting them access to services so that we're ready to say we're a city that is real about our problems, but we're also a city that has great growth opportunities. And so for me, that's probably the biggest part. But I will say, as Mayor Hancock noted, I'm looking forward to us perhaps being on the other side of the Omicron wave. I'm looking forward to us being able to use a lot of our convention and tourism facilities that all of our cities have invested so much in, making sure that we get to share that Kansas City story with more people who are coming through. And while I love talking to all of y'all in boxes and, we get to hang out a decent amount, getting on the ground, welcoming people, welcoming businesses, helping out so many of those small businesses, the barber shops, the restaurants and others, where online doesn't necessarily work in all the same ways, particularly businesses that are operated by women and people of color. And I think in the next year, we're going to have those opportunities to get back to that level of business, to get that support, which will help Kansas City grow even greater.
Very well said. Well, we've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to do an open mic moment. Mayor Hancock and Mayor Lucas, what have we not talked about today that you'll be remiss if we leave this forum without having mentioned to those who are tuning in and who are involved in public finance with us?
I think Mayor Lucas touched on it real briefly, and that is the issue around homelessness and our most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness in our city. And we got a lot of mitigating circumstances, including the addiction issues that are going to have to be addressed. When you talk about economics, that's a real economic challenge and opportunity, quite frankly. It's human resource. It is humanity that, quite frankly, is not as productive, that we've got to find a way to get productive and get stable. And to Mayor Lucas's point, cities that are digging in on that issue are ultimately going to be the ones who, I think, set the pace on how best to serve those who are most challenged. We will spend $190 million this year on the challenges of homelessness and housing in the city of Denver. And that is, we recognize it's not about the money. But we got to at least have the resources to create the effort to do the housing first and the connection of services and addressing the behavioral health challenges that have come along with it.
I'll just say very briefly, cities are where stuff gets done. And so as we've discussed, and we see the partisanship rather in Washington and our state capitals, you talk to any mayor in America, you pick up the phone after this Zoom, you can call almost any mayor and say, I want to get something done. I want to help you finance that important project you care about. We'll listen, we'll work with you, we'll help get it passed through city councilmen, the board of aldermen, and that's what cities are all about. And so that's why I'm excited to be a mayor, because this is where we're actually getting that work done to, I think, help our country recover even better.
Well, thank you both so much for your time, your service to our communities, to America. Thank you to the Milken Institute and Dan Carroll and his enduring sense of humor for gathering us together. So we're going to work closer together. We're going to achieve equitable outcomes and kick COVID to the curb in 2022. So thank you both. Look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Take
you.
care, Mayor.